וקודם כל תודה לכל חברי הוועד ולאורי היושב ראש, הוא זה שהתחיל לפני שנה במסורת הזאת של הדיבייט. הוא השתתף בשנה שעברה יחד עם יעל סלע שפירו, והנושא היה על שימוש בתרגום ממוחשב כן או לא. אני חושב שכולנו השכלנו. היום השאלה היא, הדיון יתנהל באנגלית, זה יהיה I'm sorry, the content of the proposed project is opposed to my conscience, therefore I must decline. וזה יהיה בעד או נגד. הנושא הזה עלה גם במלוא תפארתו באספה הכללית, בעקבות הרצאה של יעל כהנא שדמי. אני לא אגיד שלצערנו היא לא יכולה להשתתף, כי הסיבה שהיא לא משתתפת היא לידת ביתה, ולכן באמת אנחנו מאחלים לה בסימן טוב. זה כן ירבו סיבות כאלה כדי לא להשתתף בדיבייט. ביד הטיעון הזה יציג יעקב ג'קי נרמנשטיין, בן 66, רק לפני שבוע מילאו לו 66, אז יום הולדת שמח ג'קי. לשעבר עורך דין, לשעבר מורה באנגלית ואזרחות, מתמטיקה והיסטוריה, מתרגם מקצועי שסיים את לימודיו באוניברסיטת תל אביב, עובד בעברית, אנגלית וצרפתית בכל הקומבינציות ובכל הכיוונים, ובמיוחד נושאים משפטיים ואקדמיים, ומנסה להיכנס לתחום הספרותי. ג'קי הוא גם חובב ג'אז ומנגן בסקסו טנור. הוא גם חובב עניין של קומיקס ורומנים גרפיים בכל שלושת השפות שציינו, פלוס ספרדית בגרסה הדרום-אמריקאית ובפורטוגזית ברזילאית, וכמובן יותר מכל בצרפתית. הוא גם סבא ל8 נכדים, כולם בנים. נגד יש לנו את שרלוט חרמן, יש לה BA בשפות ובלימודי תרבות מאוניברסיטת אוטרכט בהולנד, ומאסטר בלימודי תרגום וספרות צרפתית מאוניברסיטת תל אביב. היא מתמחה בתיאוריה של התרגום במיוחד, אבל מתעניינת גם בנושא של תקשורת בין תרבותית ופילוסופיה בכלל, כמו עניינים של מהם גבולות התרגום, תרגום והתאמה של ספרות למדיה פופ, כמו למשל קומיקס וקולנוע. יש לה מיומנויות בכתיבה בעל פה בתרגום אקדמי, ספרותי ומסחרי, ובשנים האחרונות היא גם תספר לנו על כך. היא פעילה במיוחד כמתורגמנית דיפלומטית, כחלק מהפעילויות בשגרירות בלגיה בתל אביב. היא הסבירה לנו קודם שמה שאנחנו רואים ברקע זה באמת המעון של שגריר בלגיה בתל אביב. קצת על הכללים, כנהוג בדיבייט מתחיל הצד שמציג בעד, שזה יהיה ג'קי, עד 8 דקות, אחר כך שרלוט, 8 דקות. יהיו שאלות הדדיות ביניהם והערות עד ל6 דקות כל אחד. בינתיים אנשים יכולים להזרים שאלות לצ'אט, אני אקריא אותם, ויעמוד לרשות המציגים עד דקה כדי להשיב על כל שאלה. ואחר כך יהיה סיכום, קודם הצד שנגד 2.5 דקות, ואז 2.5 דקות הצד שבעד. אבל לפני זה, לפני כל הדברים האלה אנחנו נצביע מי בעד ומי נגד העניין שהוצג? כאמור, I'm sorry, the content of the proposed project is opposed to my conscience, therefore I must decline. בתום הדיבייט אנחנו נעשה הצבעה חוזרת כדי לראות אם מישהו שינה את דעתו או דעתה. אז אתם מוזמנים להצביע בצ'אט האם אתם בעד או נגד, ובסוף נפרסם באמת את הדברים. So with no further delay, I hope the rules are clear. Again, I'll ask both the participants and the audience when they will ask questions not to promote their own agenda for or against any specific subject. Only let's stick to the issue, the principal issue, which is, are you going to reject a project because it opposes your conscience and therefore you must decline, yes or no? So, Jackie, the floor is yours. You have 8 minutes from now.
Thank you very much. Okay, I unmuted myself. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Glad to see you. Some of you I've already met in the past. Let me start going straight to the jugular and stating an Israeli law which is accepted concerning the right to practice any profession. And from there on, I think the manner in which anyone practices his profession is his own to judge. Meaning I may or may not be willing to give service to anyone I choose, especially regarding things that are contrary to conscience. So the first argument is based on the fact that I have I will say, almost natural right, which is embedded into a basic law, Chok Yesod, in Israel, meaning that it is considered a kind of constitutional right to practice a profession as I see fit. So there lies the basis of my arguments. The second one is concerning ideology. I have a third one which is related to ideology, but not only to it. I'll get to it, of course, in a short while. So concerning ideology, I will say that as you have a right ideologically to do many things, with reserves, of course, like anything else, especially when your ideology is contradictory to human rights in the large term of it. For example, if I refuse to do some work because it is, let's say, I profess a racist ideology, and it is anti-racist, then theoretically, I'm giving this example on purpose, you will see why in a second. So then I will say, I will not help promote something which goes against my ideology. But we all know that, especially in Israel, Nazi ideology is, or racist ideology, is unaccepted as a legitimate one. On the other hand, if, for example, I'm asked by a certain organization which has an ideology which I personally judge as anti-Israeli, then I will say I will not give a hand to anti-Israeli propaganda or the proliferation of anti-Israeli views. And I think it's really legitimate, especially in our case, especially when some of anti-Israeli or anti-Zionism is just a facade for anti-Semitism. So I think this is the second layer, which, as I said, is based on the first one regarding the constitutional law of Israel, which lets me refuse work which goes against my ideology. My third argument regards, I will call it a practical or personal layer, in that some people are more sensitive to certain subjects than others, and then they will refuse and say, look, this subject is too sensitive for me, and I will not do it. If I may, I'm not promoting anything, but a specific case of consecutive translation, but nevertheless it is relevant. I will mention someone in that context, a colleague of us. Her name is Michal Schuster, who taught me what we call community translation, meaning services we give in the community, translating for people within the doctor's office or in court. Many times I've done this myself. And for example, there is this situation where a veterinarian is questioned about not being very nice to animals, and not doing what he should do in order to lessen the suffering of animals which he treats. And this questioning by the authorities, then films were shown to him, of course, and to the translator, because this vet didn't speak very good Hebrew, and the interrogator didn't speak much English. So a translator was called in, and in order to conduct the translation as professionally as he could, and referral were made to films which were shown on a computer, but with details which were, let's say, some of them were gruesome, then if personally you have a problem with such things, then of course you should be allowed to say, look, this is something personal. I don't know if I can classify it totally as ideological, because I think all of us are against suffering in general to people, and of course animals. It's not really ideological. Still, the right to refuse work is something, I think, as I said, basic and all the way through the practical. Thank you.
Okay, perfect, on time, and you have spare time even. So Charlotte will argue against. Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will not, I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot argue against, obviously, the laws of Israel, or I don't think also that's the purpose of the debate. My arguments are more of philosophical nature. And I will start by saying that when you're not translating a specific text and choosing not to choose, in a way, that is also a choice. You hereby give the responsibility to another who might be doing a worse job, and purely for the selfish reason that you want to have a clear conscience for yourself. So the motivation may be social justice or social responsibility, but in the end it's a selfish game based on the free will of one individual and the choices they make. The second argument I would like to make is the task of the translator. What is the essence of the job of the translator, as described a lot by Anthony Pym in Theory of Ethics in Translation, in his Ethics of Translation book. And he says that translators do not belong in the political, social, or cultural field. We are simply the messengers. When you become a translator, your motivation is to overcome a language barrier between human beings. This language barrier exists organically. It's not the result of a deliberate action or of some dictator's opinion or that caused that human beings do not speak the same language. It's an organic result of human evaluation. And therefore, I would like to compare, in a way, a translator to a doctor. What we do is we transfer a message that is not being understood between two parties, just like a doctor is fixing a body part that is not functioning well, regardless of that person's character or human opinion. Doctors have a code of ethics. I believe in most countries that they need to save any human life. And we tend to think that it's not the same for translators, but why? A human life is sacred, but so is having an opinion, I believe. As in a translation, you first and foremost serve the transfer of knowledge and freedom of speech. So again, translator is in essence a science, just because the object of the science is not a rock or a plant as in normal other sciences, but it's an opinion or a product of the human mind. We kind of turn it, human beings, into a political or cultural issue, but it's not. In essence, we are scientists. Another argument I would like to make is that we are not always so keen on choosing. Most of the time, we are quite opportunistic, and refusing is also an act of opportunism. We live in an age where we believe in free will, in the power to change things and determine our own life course, etc., etc. But sometimes we kind of like it that we do not have to choose. Some of us perhaps know the feeling that we're looking to choose to read a book. We go to a shop and we choose a name that we know. Some of us perhaps look a bit further for more few authors that are less known. But let's be honest, who of us ever goes to some Facebook page of some unknown artist that has just started writing, or author, some blog, some article, and chooses that as his next book to read on his next holiday, for example? I don't think that's what we do. Even most intellectuals and even authors that I personally know, they will trust the publishing house for what they have chosen to translate or publish. I think that shows certain trust that we have in the system, in the publishing houses, in the agents. And I choose to trust that publishing house. Studies on group dynamics in sociology have also concluded that when you're in a group and you're negotiating, that in order for the group to function optimal, you need different types of characters, different type of behaviors. The translator's talent, I think, is to compromise. Has also a talent for being invisible, to intermediate, and to transfer, and kind of even ignores his own personal point of views and values. I once also wrote an article on how translators are characterized in literature. So books in which translators are the heroes. It's really interesting because the elements that return are the following. A translator suffers, is frustrated by a lack of recognition. He's stuck between two cultures. He's an unstable person, depressed, or even a betrayer. And I do think this is true. I do think that a translator must have a really hard, tough skin to be kind of intermediating between two parties. But I do not see why this is something that we need to change. And this has a lot to do with the essence of labor. The essence of labor is recompensation, not to receive a quiet conscience. So refusing a translator is not the same thing as, for example, refusing to go to the army. A profession is a choice of how you earn your money. If you do not like it, you go to a different job. In certain societies, nobody likes their job. Can you actually refuse it? In some cases, perhaps yes, but you won't get money. Refusing is a Western norm. It's a Western luxury. Even the concept of freelancer shows that it's based on freedom. And the fact that we're assuming that people have to be able to afford an opinion or principles is a very Western point of view. Bringing social responsibility to the work floor is a luxury. And there's obviously nothing wrong with the luxury, but let's just make sure that other cultures play by the same rules before we shout, go ahead, enjoy your rights to refuse. For example, in Asia, I think we kind of know that obedience, for example, is a really big deal. You do not go refuse or argue with your employer. So the choice of defining professionism and defining the role of the translator depends on how the professional community has decided to locate the practice of translation within particular institutions and the power of these institutions. The last argument I would like to make is if one individual translator is really the person to refuse in order to send out a message. So is there really an impact on social responsibility in that? I know that it's very, in these days, we very much tend to look at bottom-up kind of movements, revolutions. We kind of want to turn around the hierarchy, the existing hierarchy. But is that really something that works, or is it just a result of a growing rich population, too much media where people can just go ahead and let their big ego say what they want to have to say? Sorry. All right. Is my time up?
1 minute left.
All right, yeah. And then the last part I wanted to say is that also sometimes you might not be sure about the interpretation as much as you are. I had a personal anecdote that I wanted to share about diplomacy, but I'm not going to do that. But I think that everyone is aware with the "we do not negotiate with terrorists" attitude. In this case, I would say that we are not politicians, we are translators. And it's not up to us to judge a certain party as not an equal partner for discussion, or in this case, translation, negotiations, and a process of peace. Refusing to translate it is in a way patronizing the source text and its culture and its author. And I do not believe that's our task.
Okay, your time is up. So thank you both. I hope the soundings are clear. I'll just remind Charlotte we do have an ethical code at our association, as most translators associations have, and plus each of us has some ethical issues of ourselves, I guess. And before I'll let you discuss between you, I'll remind just a couple of cases that about what you said, about who asks for the job also. Some 25 years ago, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the history department, published a partial translation of Mein Kampf into Hebrew. And it was a really big issue. Translating Mein Kampf into Hebrew is not an easy task. And I'm not talking about the lexical part of it. Being the translator of Mein Kampf into Hebrew, I guess, regretfully, the translator is not with us anymore, so we cannot ask him, but it was a nightmare. And I guess there must be a difference also if you are requested to translate for academic reasons parts of Mein Kampf by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, rather that if you are asked to translate the same chapters by a neo-Nazi association, for example. So you also have this context issue on who to refuse and your right to refuse to take a job. Plus another thing, mainly to Jackie, because he argues for, do you state that you decline the job because of the ideological issue, or just make up, okay, I'm too busy, or have no time, or whatever? Because remember that sometimes refusing taking a job can be construed as discrimination. So again, just some points to consider. Charlotte, if you want to ask Jackie some things, and Jackie to Charlotte, you are invited to. Up to 6 minutes each. Okay.
Well, first of all, let me state that, of course, none of this is my personal opinion. I've been asked to play the against part in this debate, so I did my best I could. Obviously, there are different contexts in which you do it. Also, this discussion did not really touch the middle path, I think, that exists between refusing and translating, which is explanations, using footnotes, there's all kinds of ways in which you can turn a translation into more of an interpretation or an adaptation. So I didn't want to discuss all these topics either. But yeah, I think when you get to look at the core of the discussion, then at some point it becomes a question of trust, of who do you trust, who you translate for, and it becomes also an issue of a diplomacy, and yeah, not taking part in something is in a way also running away for it. I think that's how you see it. Obviously, if the law says that you're free to make a choice of which text you translate, yes or not, then who am I? I mean, I'm absolutely not against that argument. I mean, I see that as a valid point. I just think that there are several ways to look at it.
Yeah.
I do agree with a few things Charlotte mentioned, yet I would like to point out two things. One, I didn't mention the Israeli law as a point of law, or rather as something reflecting on our society, and it just puts this freedom on a very high level, since it's a constitutional, or let's say close to constitutional right. So this is why I raised it as a basis for my arguments, which unlike you, I do stand behind them, let's say ideologically, if you will.
That was my guess, yeah.
Oh, okay. Second thing is, I do respect our profession very much, and I do agree that the main object of this profession is to overcome these cultural, linguistic, and all other obstacles which we face because different people speak different languages, and I will mention the classical letter from the Japanese, which was there was one word mistranslated into English, and there came the second bomb on Nagasaki. So that is to show that what we do sometimes has a very, very crucial effect.
Consequences, yeah.
Consequences. Thank you. Yeah. But you mentioned it, and I'd like to emphasize my refusal, beyond my right to do so, might come along with a price to pay. Question is, am I ready to pay it? I think I don't know. I don't like the word extreme, because when I say extreme, it might be extreme to me, but I might be someone extreme to someone else. Because in Israel, you say, you put people on the right, on the left, and say, okay, so, but when you look right, who do you see? And when you look left, who do you see? But thing is, there are ideologies which I think are consensual, not only in the Western world, but other places, even if they do not, because of the governments, they are not very open. Most people will agree that freedom is basic and you should profess it the way you see fit, unless, for example, we'll take an extreme example. Nazi ideology is not something to be propagated. On the other hand, I would say that it is very important to translate Mein Kampf into Hebrew. I think it is something very important to do. I never understood. I mean, I could understand the emotions of, let's say, playing Wagner in the Philharmonic Orchestra of Israel. I could understand it and accept it. But translating Mein Kampf, I think, is basic and important to the educational system, especially since we have really a very, I mean, we give the whole subject a very, very large a weight in our culture, in our history, in our remembrance. So it's important. Back to the price to pay. It is my choice to pay the price of not getting the job, assuming that someone will be hungry enough to do it. Again, I'm going a bit heavy on the argument, but I know that if you're really keen on something, then you will find someone to do the job, because that's life, that's economics. Sometimes, and we all know that there are a few, let's say, a few people in our industry who are ready to do things because they have to feed a family, and they're not always very happy about the price, nor maybe the subject they have to deal with. But you know, first things first, individually. I will say, this is my last sentence at the moment. I will say that I will wish upon every one of us that they will have the economical freedom to say no.
The luxury, as
the luxury.
Charlotte,
Okay.
yeah. So if you want to ask something, Charlotte, or something to address, for her to address.
No, no, it's good.
No,
Thank you.
Fine. So we'll leave the floor for the audience. They will write this time in order to not interfere into each other with the microphones. So please send your questions on the chat, and we'll try to answer them, okay? Or your remarks, please. It will be nice to see colleagues on these. Okay. Okay. Not all opinions are equal. Some, Yael Schneerson said, some opinions are unacceptable. Okay. Arya Gus, will you translate Mein Kampf from Nice Sum of Money or the memoirs of Saddam Hussein or Nasrallah? Charlotte?
So wait, just a second, sorry, I lost the screen. Yeah. First of all, yeah, I mean, I'm not giving my personal opinion here on what I would do and what I would not do, but I think that according to what I argued, yes, indeed, we should do that. It serves knowledge. It serves knowledge about culture, about leaders, about what people think, and we can also use it, you know, against them. If you want to know your, what's the saying? Know your friends, but know your enemy. No, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Yeah, I absolutely think there's something to say for that, for the free knowledge, the free access to knowledge, and yeah, I think that's valid.
Jack, will you translate Mein Kampf?
Again, I
or
would,
Saddam
I would
Hussein's
say,
or Nasrallah's memories?
Look, the specific examples are a bit problematic because my answer will be automatic, because know thy enemy. It would be most important, if I'm not fluent enough in Arabic, to read Nasrallah and Saddam Hussein in the original. But I think it is important, not as, but a close second or close third maybe to Mein Kampf. The question of money, as I said, regarding Mein Kampf, or even, for example, if the I don't know, the an army institution would say, look, we need your talent in Arabic to translate Nasrallah's book or ideology, then I will be happy to do it, because it's very important, I mean, in the practical aspect. As I said, there are also sometimes personal aspects which are based for the refusal. So, of course, let's say I wouldn't go to, I don't know, I don't want to, but let's say to an Israeli Arab who is openly professing pro-Nasrallah and Hezbollah views. There are a few of them in this country. And I wouldn't go to him and say, please, let's say as the army or the army intelligence, or one of the intelligences in Israel, I wouldn't go to him and say, would you translate it for me? And I will, of course, regard his refusal as legitimate for him, in his view, although I don't accept those views and I don't agree.
Then it is over. Manuel says a company proposed to him to translate a document for the government of, I guess it's Equatorial Guinea. The document was about security, military devices to repress civil population. Why should I lend a hand to a corrupted tyranny by translating that document? In a very short way.
Yeah. I don't know if it really applies to that specific. I mean, it probably doesn't to that specific argument. And I mean, it's a very complex topic to just say something as bold as I'm about to say. But hey, that's why we have a debate. I think I do think that yeah, contrary to your beliefs. So you're putting your beliefs central to the debate here. Your beliefs may be not well understood, or the other party may be joking, which is a very common issue when we have discussions of ideology. It can be meant in a different way. Sometimes you realize about it later, or so again, yeah, I don't see that the translator should have a problem with that as part of his profession. I don't see why that should be a problem.
Evelyn says, in a free market, people may choose to use my services or not for whatever reason. Yeah. I may choose to take on a certain job or not. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Free market, Western world. That's what I try to argue. Not everywhere this is the case, and yeah. Of course, in a free market, as Jackie said, it's even a law here to be able to oppose certain activities. So I'm not going to argue that, of course, but I do think that yeah, what I said already, it's not in every culture that way.
Gila mentions
I was reading also, yeah,
legal liability considerations and missionary dissemination illegal in Israel too. Okay. What about legal issues?
I think that's more for Jackie.
Crystal clear against. I hope everything illegal is against our ethics, but sometimes they are just controversial. They are illegal, but they are controversial. For example, I lectured many years ago about the legal status of translators in Israel. I was asked to translate something on cultivating cannabis, which was clearly illegal and times changed, yeah. And today it is legal on these things.
Yeah.
But if you have something to say about this.
I think it shows how yeah, our opinions and our perceptions can change. I see on the site, I didn't read all the comments, I'm sorry, but I see on the site about advertising smoking. It's the same principle, you know. Who knows? Smoking one day will be less harmful than it's considered to be today. I'm just saying it's a subjective point of view, and as a translator, you must remain objective and just transfer the message and not all the things around it.
And I guess the lawyer has something to say about these crystal clear cases of illegal things, Jack?
Yes, some time ago, I think even less than a year, a pâtissier refused to bake a wedding cake for a one-gender marriage, and it went to court, and the court had to weigh his right for conducting his profession as he sees fit, and on the other hand, the unacceptable discrimination, which is reflected by the fact he refused. And as far as I remember, yeah, I was interested, of course, socially, because I'm not in the profession anymore. I only look for very specific.
Once a lawyer, always a lawyer.
But yes, unfortunately so. Yet everybody, anyone who calls me a lawyer said, "Oh, we're starting with bad naming." Thank you. But
I'm not going to say anything. My sister is a lawyer herself, so.
My sincere condolences.
Yeah.
So, but let's get back to the refusal of baking that cake. One of the main arguments was, look, there are many other bakers. Go to them, and they will not refuse. Let me be at peace with myself. I'm not going into. I'm not carrying any anti-gay marriage flag or something. But this is something I personally don't feel good with, and I don't want to do it. And this is my. I don't know. I think the court said that it was discrimination, but told the couple, why insist? Because they went there as kind of trying to get an ideological sentence. So
that's exactly the case I had in mind when I said about discrimination.
Yes.
Same thing because it went to the court.
Sorry to interrupt. Same thing was lately with something a printing.
Exactly, the Der Chanitzot with Warshawski back in
exactly. So
late 80s, I think it was.
But may I refer to one of the first arguments of Charlotte? Is it okay?
Yeah, for
Thank
me,
you.
yes.
No, I was asking the moderator because he's the authority
yeah,
here.
Sure.
Thank you. You mentioned that we can be compared to doctors and scientists. I would say there are some aspects that indeed we are compared to doctors, where we are needed for help or significant help. Let's not enter into details. Each one will choose his own relevant example. Scientists, I remember a long time ago when I was a political science student in the Hebrew University. And they were showing, with some graphs and models, something very interesting, which was prior to May 77, showing that there is no theoretical possibilities that a government in Israel will be formed without the then it was called Avodah Mapam or Ma'arach being the center of that government. And this was just about a year and a half before the May 77 elections. And I did ask how that, with all due respect, it's called Mada HaMedina, but yet I don't think it's very nice to call it that way, but it doesn't stand to the criteria. I think that translation is not a science. It is a profession. Ethics is important in it, of course. But we're not scientists. And even scientists have a problem sometimes. Consider those who did not agree with the Manhattan Project.
Charlotte?
Yeah, if you look, I think, at the history of translation and history of also the human thoughts and philosophy, and then the philosophy of knowledge, I think you call it in English, then you can also see very clearly that that has become, your point of view has become more and more popular since, I think, the 80s. I think in translation studies, they call it the cultural turn, the political turn, where indeed we take a much bigger look at the aspect of who is the translator and what are the norms and the ideologies of the translator. So definitely, there's definitely something to say for that as well. But I do think that previously to that, it was regarded by several thinkers as a scientific linguistic project of transferring from one to the other. And in theory, it's still being regarded like that because many research is being done in machine translation. It's still being seen as something that theoretically, perhaps one day, could be done by a machine and not by a human being. So I think that yeah, there is definitely room for debate. It's good that we're having this debate.
You blame the machines.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll read several because we have many messages coming in. Ian says, many translators are proud to see their names on page 1 as the translator. Would you be proud to see your name on a racist, hateful text? Susan says, I have problems with commercial gambling materials, for example, or overtly sexual descriptions in literary translation.
Yeah, I think you already know my answer because I said it several times.
Yeah.
If I would be a translator, then I would not be bothered by the fact that my name is on that text. No, because I'm a translator. That's what I do.
Okay.
If I'm along with my viewpoint, if I'm along with the viewpoint I'm defending in this debate, of course.
Yeah, sure. We are talking about, they do not reflect necessarily your personal view, of course. Would you translate for a missionary whose professed purpose is to convert the readers?
Yes.
Okay. Donna, I will refuse a job in a field I'm unfamiliar with because I do not have the vocabulary or understanding. I think the same is true for viewpoints that are contrary to my beliefs. Okay. Anat, how about advertising smoking?
Yeah,
Which again is one of the things that changed during the years. Same can be said about advertising in general. Sorry, mistyped. The question is whether the translator bears a responsibility for transferring the message. Okay.
Just one last thing about the comment of if I'm not what was it? If I'm not capable of translation, if I'm not, what was the sentence?
Yeah, if you do not know the vocabulary, and
yeah.
So that I think for your beliefs.
I think that is more a discussion of the question of how do we translate. It's not a question of if or. I mean, of course, if you don't feel confident enough, then you'll refuse, and if you feel you'll do it. But I think that then there is a responsibility of the translator once he's accepted the job, he started to translate, to have a look at how can he make some sort of a disclaimer, how can he make some sort of a how do you say, a footnote, explanations within the text. So that's more a question of how do you translate. But here I think we're discussing the fact that, yeah, we are allowed to refuse or we're not allowed to refuse a translation.
Yeah. Eva says that she thinks comparing translation with science is unfit. Okay.
May I refer to a comment made by Danit, old acquaintance of mine from the profession, which I admire very much, I may say. She wrote, you wrote, Danit, since I see you there. The only caveat is that once I do take a job, I have no right to put my opinion into the translation in any way. It is against the translator's ethics code. So in principle, of course, I agree with you. Yet we all know, I would put an emphasis on literary translations. We all put and always put something of ourselves, the culture, our cultural background that we carry into a translation, that we can't avoid it. But I do agree that we have to be very careful in it, because I think the fact that there are different translations for the same especially literary work just shows that you can't avoid it. You can't avoid it. I won't give any example, but specifically, I think Danit, of course, knows. I suppose everyone here knows what I'm talking about. But it doesn't go as far as literary. It goes even to, let's say, when we translate journalistic opinions and such writings, which is done every day. So it is something very important we have to be very careful about.
And of course, my apologies to Danit for skipping your message. I didn't see it earlier. And again, Michal said about liability. גוס, אליעזר, אז עכשיו דיברנו על תרגום מרצון, מה באשר, sorry. It jumps all the time, so I'm having some technical problems with reading some of the messages. Arie asks, what happens during an emergency? For example, when you're dealing as an intermediary, I guess, between kidnappers and kidnapped. So, or between patient and physician.
This is quite a problem, I might say. But for example, let's say the physician doesn't talk Arabic, and the one who put the bomb and is severely injured and injured others around him, regardless of their religion and beliefs, and he's in the hospital, and the doctor does not understand Arabic, and he needs to get some answers from the wounded person, and he needs a translator. I would say I was put in a certain dilemma, but it wasn't urgent. When I used to be a lawyer, I used to defend Arab residents in Judea and Samaria, West Bank, whatever your political belief is, in a specific subject, which was taxes. And I had no misgivings of defending them and doing the best I could in order for them not to pay more than they should, as I saw it according to the law and everything. I was proposed to represent terrorists, fighters, Palestinians who were accused of terrorist acts, and I kindly refused it, which was my right as a lawyer not to accept any case. And I paid the price for it because I was offered quite a lot of money, but this was how I felt about it. I had no misgivings of representing them against the state as such in tax.
Okay. Liad says it depends on the context. Uri asks, isn't there a slippery slope to refusing? Do science papers where we disagree with the results fail under ideological objection? The pool of skilled translators may be such smaller for some subjects. I'll put, for example, the issue of vaccinations as an example.
I don't exactly understand that's the point.
For example, maybe you have, I think I will not send my kids, for example, to a well, my kids are not that age, of course, but I'm not going to send them to a kindergarten which has non-vaccinated children. Will I translate a paper saying that vaccinations are bad, for example, or will I refuse because I refuse to accept that point?
Mm-hmm.
If I understand correctly what Uri meant, or if it's clearly proved that the sun doesn't revolve around the earth.
I'm more interested in the part where he says, "Isn't there a slippery slope to refusing?" I didn't really understand the rest of the comment, but I do think indeed there is a slippery road to the right of refusing. That's not our job. Again, it's not our job to refuse and to choose what we translate or not. That is why I included a part about trust in the system you work for. You choose your employer. You choose your public agency. You choose your agent. I had a personal anecdote, like I said, about these beautiful flags here on the back of my screen. I work in diplomacy. And I have had severe experiences in interviewing refugees that are applying for a visa for Europe. And I can tell you as a translator, sometimes you also do not understand exactly what a person is saying. You do not understand what their intention is. No, most of the time you know what the intentions is in this case because they clearly want a visa. But you also do not understand how what they say is not always what they mean. That's what I'm trying to say. And sometimes they think they should respond in a certain way. That is not exactly what you yeah, there's just miscommunication. I had a longer example prepared, but I don't want to elaborate too much. But I just think that, yeah, there is a slippery road to refusal. Sometimes you do not understand a person, and it's not just a solution to run away for translating it. In the opposite, I think you must confront it in order to find out what the reason is why you're so hesitant to accept that viewpoint. And that's the core of diplomacy. That's the core of diplomacy. It is to put trust in the system that you serve. In my case, the Belgian government, and in order to understand that you don't put your own opinions in front of that you kind of serve, if you want to say it that way. Now, I did make a personal comment in a way, which was not my intention, but I do think, yeah, again, it's a lot about trust, and I think that in refusing there's a lot of mistrusts, even aggressivity, which can block diplomacy and negotiations.
Okay, Ulrich says, not quite. If I disagree with the science, is rejecting an ideological issue. The argument someone else will do it doesn't work for some specialist subjects.
Exactly. So I think you should translate it.
Okay. Einat says, I translated for the police and in court for people who committed crimes or felony. I'm not the one prosecuting, I'm just translating. Gila corrects us about cases that are clearly interpreters and not translators. If it was my mistake when I spoke, Gila, I apologize. Trust me, I know the difference.
I also, yeah. Sorry, no, I didn't want to interrupt, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I think that the last comment of Ada is also interesting, that we must hear the point of people who refuse vaccination in order to argue with them. Today we live in a society that likes to talk and that likes to shout, I believe. And I think that in order for people to communicate, there must be also listeners. And that's why I think that the role of the translator is to be a listener.
I do agree concerning the comment of Einat regarding the translation in court. First of all, again, please don't consider me, petty, but it is the right of the defendant to get the best translation, because he has the right to present his side of the case. And we all know how important this is, because sometimes, the whole system is very, very powerful, the police and the prosecution, and sometimes the court themselves. And so it is really important to do it. And especially when the interpreter can go into court knowing that up to the sentence, the defendant is considered innocent. So he does a very important work up to the point where the judge decides which way it goes. So I think there is less of a problem there. Although, like I told you, those Arabs who were accused with terrorist acts, which I didn't want to defend. It's not that I decided ab initio, as we say in Latin, that they were guilty. I did not want to put myself in a place where I used, let's say, technicalities in the larger sense, and one who did what he did would go scot-free because someone messed up with the evidence, or I don't know what. I didn't want to get there anyway. So, but I do stress the point. I think they deserve a full professional defense. It is important, because we know that even there, sometimes there are problems, and not. Okay. I'm not sure everybody who is in jail really deserves to be there.
And I'll ask again the question I asked earlier. When you refuse to take a work, do you say it's because of my, I don't know, ethical, ideological, or whatever point of view, or do you simply refuse by using other techniques, such as saying that you're very busy, or asking for fees that you know that they are not going to pay?
Be my guest, Charlotte.
No,
Ah.
it's my question. Okay.
I would not refuse. So, according to this debate, I'm not refusing anything.
Jack, the question was to you mainly.
Let me tell you, I think one of the reasons I decided not to continue my life as a lawyer and change it to educating and teaching was that I have a very, very serious problem with with honesty. I will not say that I never lied. Of course I did, like anyone else, but continuing in this profession would have involved me to do almost certainly do things I didn't want to do, which were against my beliefs and everything. And I can assure you that if someone would ask me to do a work which is contrary to my conscience, to my beliefs, I would tell him that it is so.
Okay.
Especially since it probably, I mean, I would not have a problem translating an invitation to a one-gender marriage. I can tell you that it's a change of mind with me. I used to be a male chauvinist pig, but I changed my opinions. I have 3 daughters whom I raised just like I did raise my firstborn son. And then it dawned on me that, in fact, I may be professing some male chauvinist opinions, but in fact, I'm not. And I changed my mind in that. And in that too,
let the other people decide if they are or if they are not.
I accept it as it is, but
yeah.
But
okay.
As I said,
due to time restrictions, Gila says she will use diplomatic techniques. And Einat, thank you for the interesting discussion. Okay, we'll wrap up our standings. First, Charlotte, up to 2.5 minutes. Charlotte,
Okay.
the floor is yours.
I wasn't really prepared for that, but I can go over my arguments quickly.
2.5. You don't have to use
again. I think non-choice is also a choice. So leaving it to someone else is not always better. Translations should be seen as a science where you pass a message from one language to the other, and there's no room for political point of views. An argument that we haven't been speaking of a lot, maybe that was my argument about refusing. We choose when we refuse and when we don't refuse. It's not always very consistent and therefore not very believable. So the choice as an opportunistic thing that we do whenever it suits us. The essence of working is receiving money. So translation is just like a job. You're not supposed to like it. You're not supposed to agree with it. That is a luxury if you have that kind of job, but it's not always the case and not everywhere in the world. The question of impact of social responsibility. Who is responsible? Isn't it something that a larger entity should oppose to? For example, if we have, like a Nazi text, isn't it up to the government to refuse this kind of, the spreading of this kind of text, or isn't it up to the publishing house? Why is it the responsibility of the translator to refuse, who is just a one individual person? And then the last part was about, sometimes you can be wrong about how you interpret a text. And I think that as a translator, you should remain humble, open, learn from the text you translate, and perhaps there will be some room for change of your own opinion. It should not stop you from going for the translation. And that's was my point of view. Excellent. In this debate.
Thank you so much. Jack?
I would say that our profession is a profession of mostly individuals, and I think we will all admit that we are very individualistic persons, and most of us work by themselves, probably conferring with colleagues on the net, which is easier today, but we do the work ourselves. And in that spirit, I think we should be allowed to make our free choices, especially those who are freelancers, as you said, Charlotte. I'm taking it from you. I would say free choice is very, very important, especially when it regards conscientious decisions, even if I don't agree with them. Or let's say the person who gets my rejection, my refusal does not agree, but it's his right to. And hopefully I won't be the only person who can do this job. I mean, it's very rare that someone is in that position nowadays in the world, in any profession.
Perfect. So now we'll go to the floor again for the audience. You can vote if you changed your mind. And I hope that even if you didn't change your mind, you have food for thought and arguments, new arguments for and against. And I would really ask for virtual applause for both Charlotte and Jack that made an excellent use of the time. And thank you again, all of you, for joining us. And thank you again, Uri, for organizing this. Even getting 3 people, 1 moderator and 2 debaters is not an easy task. So I'll remind all our members again that even if you're not a member of the VAD, you have plenty of space to do things as a volunteer and to do some things for the association as it is. So again, thank you very, very much. And we will follow in 10 minutes with the, yeah, okay, Gila?
Okay, 6:30. This was supposed to finish
6:30, okay, in 15 minutes.
At the other link, please. Okay.
Excellent.
Right. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
So thank you very, very much. And we'll see you again in 15 minutes.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you. It was interesting and fun.
Yes,
Thank you all.
most enlightening. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.